So before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're presenting this webinar this evening. I'd like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the First Nations people attending this session, and acknowledge the contribution that First Nations people make to all of our sporting clubs and community groups across the state and nation. So just a brief overview for this evening's session. Something I tried to emphasise and already emphasised it tonight. While tonight's session is focused on secretaries and treasurers, it's important that all committee members, whether they are office bearers or general committee members, are aware of the responsibilities and tasks undertaken in these roles, so they can support their team and support their committee. So I encourage all of you to share any insights you gain from this session tonight with your fellow committee members. And obviously, as I said, the recording is available for you to share and forward on as you need. As far as tonight's concerned, if you are an experienced secretary or treasurer or both, the hope is that this session will act as a bit of a refresher for you. And if you are new to the role or are looking to take on a role in the coming years or in the future, then this will hopefully help provide a bit of an introduction to some of those fundamental responsibilities. So just to start, the standard composition of the committee is to have a president, a vice president, a secretary and a treasurer, and additional committee members as required. In smaller committees, some members may take on multiple roles, such as secretary. There are occasions where there are people that take on the role of secretary and treasurer. This is obviously common in smaller organisations and clubs. And partly the reason why we decided to combine the secretary and treasurers into this presentation, that it's common that people take on both those roles. In the case of some smaller committees as well, they may not have any general committee members. There will just be those 4 key office bearers who in themselves are the general committee of the club. And again, that idea that important to know that despite your title, whatever your title may be, a lot of the roles do overlap at times, and you can share the load and responsibilities as necessary. For tonight, I'm going to focus first and foremost on firstly on the role of the secretary, and some of the tasks that are generally or traditionally aligned with the role of secretary. But as I said, these tasks can be shared as is appropriate with your fellow committee members. I suppose in the traditional sense of thinking about a secretary, we sort of know them as the keeper of knowledge. They maintain the documents and records of the club. First and foremost, as I said, in regards to committee members, but also it's really important for secretaries. First and foremost, they need to have a good working knowledge of the club rules. So the constitution, or if your club has adopted the model rules, need to be really across the rules that govern your club's governance. You should know them pretty well, have a really good working understanding of them, and you should also know where they're kept. And should be able to access them upon request from members or fellow committee members. Similar to in regards to things like policies, the secretary is responsible for managing the club's policies and their records. So again, important that they're conscious of what policies the club has, and also in terms of understanding when some of those policies might be due for review. In regards to club records, administrative documents, the storage and record keeping of the historical administrative documents is also really important for the purposes of auditing or any inquiries or queries that might come about from either the committee or members. So it's really important that they're maintained and kept in a safe space. Obviously, a lot of things are going online and going digital. Recommend that where possible, keeping a digital and a hard copy is good practice to have both cases covered. Another fundamental role of the secretary is to maintain the club's members register. As per the Act, the Incorporated Associations Reform Act, secretary must keep and maintain a register of members past and present. The information that you need to include on this for current members includes things like the member's name, the address for the notice of so that you can deliver notices to, the date they became a member, whether the member is an associate member or just a regular general member, and any other information determined by the committee. So this might include things like emails or phone numbers, emergency contact details, and this obviously has to be documented within that register. And for any former members or past members, the date of them ceasing their membership should also be recorded where possible. Another role that's generally understood for secretaries is they act as a primary point of contact for the club. For most clubs, the secretary acts as that primary point of contact for both the public and for the general public, as well as members to make general inquiries. So important that they have a really good understanding of operations of the club, so they can point at any general inquiries in the right direction. Again, most correspondence also comes through the. Apologies. Most correspondence will come via the secretary as well. They'll handle it and distribute it appropriately as that primary point of contact. So they'll receive any incoming correspondence on behalf of the club. And so they need to be able to direct any inquiries or information to the committee as required. A standard part of any committee meeting is any incoming correspondence should sort of feature as a regular agenda item, where you can provide information to the committee on any significant correspondence that's come through. Secretaries also play a really crucial role in committee meetings and general meetings at both a club level and a committee level, both in coordinating and administering the procedures involved. Some of the key procedures obviously are distributing the agenda in a timely manner for committee meetings. Generally, somewhere between 7 days before the meeting is acceptable sort of for committee meetings. In regards to minutes, secretary is often responsible for taking the minutes. Important to know that not every single word needs to be recorded, but certainly key decisions and ideas need to be logged and recorded. So if for example, a member of the committee moves a motion, it's important that you note who moved it, note who seconded it, and then note the result of any votes required, and note the result of that vote. Following any meetings, it's also really important that the secretary distributes the minutes of that meeting to the committee in a timely manner. Again, anywhere between 5 and 7 days following a meeting is good practice. The final point here in regards to those sort of primary responsibilities for the secretary, in terms of maintaining and providing members access to club documents and general meeting minutes as appropriate. So obviously understanding exactly where those documents are kept is really important for determining how to distribute them appropriately and providing people with the knowledge that they need. So finally, as a basic rule in terms of an action, be sure you understand and know the location of your club's constitution or your rules and model rules so that you can distribute those and provide knowledge on them as appropriate. Also really important that we have good awareness of all the committee members' responsibilities and have a good working knowledge of the committee's operations. A few additional responsibilities, and again, these are responsibilities that can be aligned with the secretary, but again can be shared amongst the committee as appropriate. First and foremost, notices in regards to general meetings or special meetings or disciplinary notices should generally come through from the office of the secretary, and they should be provided. They provide relevant details on when they're occurring and general information on the agenda and topics that are going to be covered in those meetings. As we sort of discussed earlier, maintaining policies, contracts, licenses, for example, liquor licensing and agreements and contracts that exist within the club. It's important that the secretary is across all of those and understands the dates and the deadlines that are associated with them. This is an interesting one in regards to the members register. Obviously, we mentioned that secretaries must maintain the members register. Members can also request access to information from the members register. However, if a member has reasonable cause to protect their details from inspection from other members, then the Secretary needs to honour those requests as well. If you have questions about that, we can talk about that in more detail at the end, just in regards to some members' rights and how those scenarios are managed. And the final one here is more that sort of overseeing role, again, probably shared quite closely with someone like the president, is that ensuring that the club is compliant with the requirements and ensuring that the committee as a whole is compliant with their rules and the legal obligations of the governance of the club. And to say that it's really important that the committee is accountable of their obligation to act in the best interests of the club. For the most part, these are really common sense duties, and there's more. You can find more detail in the resource that I've got listed there. As a general rule of thumb, if something doesn't feel right, raise it with the committee and discuss it openly. That's part of what the committee is there for. Having the opportunity to discuss those things, and if there is, for example, a conflict of interest that exists within the committee, then it's important that we're disclosing that information, and then we can, once it is disclosed, we can manage it appropriately. Again, if the Secretary is aware of these sort of fundamental responsibilities of the committee and these fundamental duties, then they can sort of oversee and ensure that the committee is complying with it. The final point there in regards to the duties to disclose and manage conflicts of interest. Again, this can be sort of managed with things like a conflict of interest register that can be updated as appropriate. And if the Secretary is, as we sort of say, managing these documents appropriately and recording them, then that's really beneficial for the committee as a whole in managing any sort of potentially challenging situations. At the end of the session, I'll show you a number of places where you can find templates for things like a conflicts of interest register, which can sort of be used as a bit of a guiding starting point to help you develop those sort of fundamental documents. So the Secretary has a pretty important role in regards to their responsibility to consumer affairs. They're the primary point of contact for consumer affairs, and it's important that the details of the Secretary are always up to date and valid and current with consumer affairs. Again, some of these responsibilities that I'm going to discuss in a moment are repeated from earlier slides to reinforce that these are legally required tasks that must be completed on behalf of the club. So obviously one of the really important responsibilities of being a Secretary is coordinating the annual general meeting. The AGM, otherwise known as the AGM, is an essential governance activity that needs to be completed every year following the conclusion of the club's financial year. So the Secretary plays a really key role in coordinating this event. As I mentioned, distributing notices of the AGM to members in accordance to club rules. So club rules might vary from club to club, but generally speaking, a notice should be distributed among members somewhere between 14 and 21 days. I think 21 is usually best practice, but again, it's dependent on what your rules say. Again, as I mentioned before, maintaining the register of members and access to it is a fundamental role of the Secretary. Another key role in regards to the annual general meeting and what comes out of that. The Secretary is responsible for communicating to the Consumer Affairs the annual financial statement of the club to Consumer Affairs. The financial report is an important document required by Consumer Affairs. This document is required to show Consumer Affairs that the committee and the club are appropriately managing the finances of the club and that you are not in an insolvent position. The yearly financial report must be approved by members of the AGM before being submitted as part of that annual statement to Consumer Affairs. Again, as I mentioned, the Secretary is the primary point of contact for Consumer Affairs. So if that changes, it's important that the new Secretary updates the Consumer Affairs on the details of the new Secretary within 14 days. 14 days is that key number there. A lot of the information I've derived for this evening has come from Justice Connect's Secretary Sectorial. It's quite a dense document, but it's fairly comprehensive and provides a really clear outline of the various steps and requirements of a secretary at a not-for-profit organisation or sports club and sports clubs. Obviously, as we mentioned, the secretary plays a pretty crucial role in regards to meetings, both annual general meetings and committee meetings. In regards to general meetings, they're required to circulate meeting notices to members and public in accordance with the club rules. So as I mentioned before, somewhere between 14 and 21 days is generally, but again, whatever your club rules dictate. And in regards to committee meetings, it's really important that the secretary is responsible for circulating any agendas and minutes and relevant correspondence and documents to committee members prior and after you might have limits on how much the club or the committee can spend before it has to go to a vote, for example. So a club treasurer might have a significant input into the development of those policies and procedures. And again, financial plans, talking about annual budgets and where the club might be, is aiming to be financially. Again, and similar in regards to secretary and any of these office bearer roles, it's important that the treasurer has a role in developing succession planning with these roles, encouraging ideas of shadowing and sharing the load, so that the knowledge isn't kept in one place, and that in the event that the treasurer moves on, there's things in place, there's processes in place that can be adjusted to the new person. And again, the final one, often in maybe larger sporting clubs, facilitating, the treasurer can play a role in helping facilitate audits or accountants, and providing the necessary knowledge and background information in regards to accounts and incoming funds and expenses that have accrued throughout the year. In terms of desirable skills, I suppose while we sort of generally identify or hope that the ideal candidate for a treasurer is someone with financial expertise, the reality is any person that has the capacity and willingness to learn can take on this role. So you don't need to be an accountant or have an expert knowledge of financial management, but you need to be willing to develop those skills in this area. Some of the fundamental skills that you can have in place are things like a basic understanding of cash flow, being accountable, so ensuring that you sort of cross the I's and dot the T's, good with maths, or even better yet, computers. Again, have to be really honest and trustworthy, is key skill or key characteristic of really good treasurers. Again, good communication, being able to summarise the financial position and financial status of the club succinctly and in easy to understand terms is really critical for the committee to make informed decisions. Good computer skills, again, as we sort of move into modern technologies, utilising programs that help us with the accounts or help us manage the funds and do that sort of automatic calculations for us can be really beneficial. So things like other programs, like obviously internet banking is becoming more prominent, programs like Excel, accounting systems, and then obviously email to help with the communications between committee members. Again, ability to maintain accurate records, and again, if you've got computer skills where you can utilise programs, then that will help you keep accurate records. And then again, good organisation skills. And as a bit of a rough estimate, sort of 2 to 6 hours per week is generally as much time as is expected for a club treasurer. But again, understand that treasurers often have other responsibilities within the club and often sharing responsibilities. So again, maybe a bit of an underestimation there. During COVID, one of the key ideas or things that are becoming a bit more prominent now is if you don't already have a financial subcommittee, now's probably a good opportunity to form one, just to sort of share the load of the financial management and coordinating ideas. The subcommittee can work together to adjust things like the budget as appropriate and identify likely changes in income and expenditure that might have been impacted by lack of activity with the club. As mentioned, you can use this time, if you haven't got a budget, potentially to develop some budget ideas. And when we are preparing budgets, we can prepare budgets for different scenarios. So you can prepare a budget for sort of best case scenarios where potentially we return to that sort of COVID normal activity. You can prepare budgets for sort of worst case scenarios where we're sort of continuing operations but in a limited capacity, whether there's lockdowns and that sort of thing, and understanding how that might impact your financial prospects. And then also it's best to have a scenario where you're sort of estimating the most likely scenario or likely occurrence of the coming year. And again, obviously trying to predict the future is always challenging, but at least making an effort to understand where money is likely to come in and where money is likely to be expended is provide some good information for the committee going forward. In regards to budgeting and developing your budgets, a good place to start is providing some sort of comparative financial reports from previous years. So maybe you look at 2019 when we had a relatively normal season, can look back at 2019 and see where we are, and then compare that to current scenario over the last couple of years, and potentially that will help inform you in developing budgets for coming years. Again, if you can share this with the committee, then it helps the committee understand where the club is financially. Even though it is challenging to maintain communications when we are in lockdown and isolated, where you can try and keep those regular updates on the financial situation of the club, whether it's via an email updates or whether you can have committee meetings via online systems or via phone calls. Keeping that regular communication and contact is really important during this time. Oops. The final one I've got there is encouraging, and potentially this is something that the financial subcommittee can be responsible for, is encouraging discussions of innovative fundraising ideas at committee meetings or subcommittee meetings, and generating a bit of brainstorming activity in that space. Some key takeaway thoughts. Really important that we're supporting any new secretaries or treasurers in taking up the role. So the best process for that is to implement some succession planning and handovers procedures, have an induction process and a checklist so that the incumbent secretary has a good understanding of what their responsibility will entail, and same for treasurers. Really good quality committees will have processes in place where someone's learning about the responsibilities of that role before they have to take it on by themselves. As I sort of mentioned, the entire committee is responsible for financial decisions, so the treasurer can prepare and collate all the financial information and then make it available to the committee as a whole to discuss and make decisions. Again, it should be a really regular agenda item that is discussed. In regards to records and information, both financial and administrative, important that we keep multiple copies and backup copies, whether they're digital backup copies. If you can keep a hard copy and a digital copy, that's beneficial to ensuring that the documents are stored securely. And finally, establish or maintain organised filing and accounting systems. So whether you have an online system and supported by a manual system or a hard copy system, ensuring that they're set up in a way that are easy to understand and can be transferred to new secretaries or new treasurers as appropriate. As I mentioned, there's a lot of really useful resources and services out there for committees. These are just a few of them that have essentially informed the content for this evening. So the second one there, Secretary Sectorial, as I mentioned, provides a really detailed outline of the responsibilities of a secretary, as well as committee members in general. It provides a lot of really good examples and templates that can be adapted for club's use. Again, consumer affairs is obviously a key point of contact for secretaries, and ensuring you have an understanding of their role in your club is really important. In terms of some templates and other resources that might be beneficial, our community has a policy bank of templates that can be adapted for not-for-profit organisations. Club Help as well has a number of club resources and links to information on committee management. The final one there, the Treasurer Advice, again from our community, provides advice for treasurers.